We're live. My guest today is Barry, aka Shaolin. He is head of product at Dymension. They're an infrastructure company building and infrastructure for deploying RollApps. Today, we're going to be diving deep into RollApps, infrastructure, and how it can scale decentralized applications. I'm also dying to find out why he thinks interchain security shouldn't scale more than 5 chains. Before we get started, make sure to hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and subscribe to get notified when I go live every week. And remember that none of what we discuss here on the Interop is investment advice. And if you enjoyed this content, please consider sticking with us. We're live and validating on Evmos, Quicksilver, Osmosis, and Juno. Just look for Interop in the active validator set. My guest, Barry, is coming up next, right here on the Interop. Hey, Barry.
How's it going? Glad to be on.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. This is we've been trying to plan this for a long time, and I'm glad we're finally getting around to it. And Dymension it's a product and a protocol that I've seen a lot of. Obviously, you guys are everywhere on Twitter and sort of announcing cool partnerships, and but haven't spent a lot of time diving deep into the protocol. I've done a lot of research for this, so I've got tons of questions, and so I hope to really get to the bottom of how Dymension works, how it scales, how it allows developers to build scalable applications. But also, I want to talk about how the narrative around scaling has changed over the last couple of years. I think people don't realize just how much that whole narrative has changed and how much rollups and interoperability infrastructure is allowing that to go. So thanks for coming on, and grateful we can have this conversation.
Yeah, I know we talked about me coming on about 2 months ago, and I was like, wait for testnet, we'll schedule something, then something fell through. We released testnet in February. Now it's at the end of March, and we're releasing another stage of testnet soon, so we could talk about that as well. But there's so much to cover. So where do we start?
Yeah, well, I think we can start with a little bit about yourself and how you came to become part of this team and how you got into crypto.
Right. So my name is Barry. I'm I'm a degen, pretty much. I've been in cryptos for a decade or now or so, in the weeds, out of the weeds, in the community aspect, in the technical aspect, in the business aspect. I started in crypto in 2013, if I remember correctly, mid 2013, in the Dogecoin community. Those were good times where it's like you're skating by kind of the law with the Silk Road back then and the Bitcoins and the Dogecoin, where we were fundraising the Jamaican bobsledding team, if anyone recalls correctly.
I do. That was one of the first Epicenter episodes we
really
we were talking about this. Yeah. We were talking about how Dogecoin had funded the Jamaican bobsled team. Oh my god, that's so
right.
Yeah, it goes back.
So
really far.
that's what brought me into crypto. Like back then, when people were just tipping each other on Reddit, that's what the community aspect is what brought me. A lot of people in my position come from the technical aspect, and I studied engineering in university and different business courses and degrees. But what really keeps me here is the community, and what brought me here was the community back then. Over time, I worked in different jobs, different protocols, and I came with a team. The team is founded in Israel by a bunch of engineers, PhDs, and business people. They were working in the ZK space with primarily on the Stark ecosystem, and then they were like, "Hey, we're moving to the Cosmos ecosystem," and they talked to me about me coming in as a leading product. And for me, product is awesome because I could hear what the community wants, where the tech is, and kind of put the pieces together. So for me, I think it's been a great experience. It's been a great learning experience because there's so much to learn, and every day the protocols are evolving. For myself, for the community, for all of the protocols that are leading the charge in the modular space and the rollup space, everything's changing so rapidly. All this new information, and then the quick reiteration and implementation into the products is one of those things that's kind of rare in web, but very common in crypto. Is like this rapid pace of innovation, and people may not see it in like the token prices, but the tech is going crazy. The tech is really expanding, and as you said, the rollup architectures and the rollup idea is really just kind of gone out of proportion now. Like everyone's building rollups.
Yeah, it's crazy how the narrative has changed in the last couple of years because, scaling has been sort of a topic that has followed me in my crypto career. I started about the same time as you, and obviously there was like the Bitcoin scaling debates, right? And a lot of the kind of primitive arguments or the primitives for the arguments of scaling began then, and then Ethereum started having its issues with scaling, and there have been multiple conversations and sort of evolving narratives around Ethereum scaling over the last like 7 years, and now it seems like there are people have more ideas about how to scale decentralized applications, but it just like it still feels like there's tons of solutions for scaling. Nobody has like a clear there isn't like a clear vision for scaling. There's like multiple visions for scaling. How do you perceive this narrative change over the last couple of years, and what's been sort of the major accelerator for where we're at now in terms of scaling?
So it's an interesting point because Cosmos also scales, right? You have Ethereum, which is the idea of Ethereum is like this world computer where everyone does the financial transactions and non-financial transactions, and there's like this decentralized world computer. Whereas Cosmos comes in a few years later after Ethereum's launch, and they say, hey, we could have these sovereign interoperable communities. It doesn't have to just be one chain. And I thought that was really cool. Like you have these interoperable chains versus this one computer where everyone is kind of fighting for block space. And that was the issue with Ethereum. Is like you have like Arbitrum come along at like more recently at least, and Optimism, and they're doing these rollups, quote unquote, where they're up processing these transactions off chain and putting the data and state on chain. But it's kind of different than the Cosmos idea, which was you can have these sovereign communities in these applications and then interact with each other more asyncly or more like cross-chain. And this is where kind of Dymension comes in, is that they look at Arbitrum and Optimism scaling the idea of one blockchain, the main blockchain of Ethereum mainnet, whereas Dymension comes in and says, hey, Cosmos is amazing idea. It's really incredible interoperability, the tech that they built out, the Tendermint and IBC from Cosmos has been built out and it's been standardized and formalized. And we could expand on that by doing these rollups on top of Cosmos. So instead of scaling one chain, we're trying to scale a network of chains. So people can deploy, rather than using a validator set of 50 validators or 100 validators, you can use 1 or 2 or 3 nodes, but you're tapping into the decentralization of the quote unquote base layer, which is the Dymension chain, which is a Cosmos chain. And you're inheriting this like security, you're inheriting this decentralization, you're inheriting the stake that exists on, or the bonded capital that exists on the Cosmos chains themselves. So the idea is pretty much it's rollups, but instead of scaling one network, we're trying to scale a network of networks.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the first time I heard of this idea of Appchains was in Cancun. Sunny was giving like a talk to a small group of people in a hotel, in one of the rooms at this hotel, and presenting his vision for Appchains, and it kind of clicked for me at that moment, and that's when I think I really got on board the Appchain vision or Appchain thesis, and started looking at like these kind of sharding solutions that Ethereum or the Ethereum community was discussing at the time as not long-term viable, at least not the right kind of design choice. And what's interesting is how, you know, I think one of the prevailing narratives now is these kind of like sovereign rollups or sovereign zones, or even app chain like things, even in the EVM world, and how things have kind of come back around to that construction, or that design pattern. How does Dymension borrow from that design pattern?
Yeah, so Dymension in a way can be seen as like a super modularized and broken apart Ethereum, where you have these execution shards, which are the rollups. Then you have a settlement layer in between, which is the Ethereum mainnet smart contracts. Then you have these data layers, which could be like data availability committees or something in Ethereum. For Dymension and how it integrates into Cosmos and how it scales the Cosmos is that you have these execution shards, which are the rollups, and there for the user, it's just like interacting with the Cosmos blockchain. You have the minting, you have the banking, you have the staking or different forms of staking, and there's some adjustments to the Cosmos SDK that we make as like the RDK, the Rollup Development Kit. And then you have the settlement layer in between, which is the Dymension Hub, and it's a Cosmos blockchain that connects all the pieces together. And then you have these DA layers, and like a primary one would be like a Celestia, which people are very familiar with now, and it's going to be the most scalable DA because they're using light client sampling and these really cool mechanisms. But in Dymension's eyes, any Cosmos chain can be a blockchain, it can be a DA layer. So all they have to do is be able to accept that data. Someone from a rollup just posts the data to that blockchain and the state root to the Dymension hub, and then it kind of connects all the pieces with IBC. So in a way, you can consider it like a super modularized and broken apart Ethereum, but also it's also scaling the network of blockchains of Cosmos. So as you said, the ideas kind of mesh together and you start getting these fuzzy barriers. So you see like sovereign blockchains on Ethereum, you see smart contracts on Cosmos, but in truth, the ecosystems kind of mesh together, and eventually I think they will interoperate with each other when like there's like snarked like clients and IBC working like back and forth.
Mm. Yeah, before we get into Dymension, there's one thing I want to talk about and sort of ask you about. And so when we're talking about rollups, uh, there's all sorts of terms that was thrown around. Like there's the sovereign rollup, there's execution rollups. We were talking earlier before the show about validiums.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have a hard time wrapping my head around how these things are different in terms of their sovereignty, in terms of the developer experience, but also the use cases for which each of these, and maybe other, like Celestium and
Yeah.
how each of the, and then also thinking about that in the context of app chains and smart contracts. How do you see the differences between these different things and these different sort of configurations, and how should developers reason about which to choose when building an application?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's one of the most unfortunate things about blockchain is that all of the definitions are fragmented. So you have people on Ethereum saying like a rollup has to use the same L1 or blockchain for posting transaction data, for posting state updates, and it all has to be contained to get like full security from that chain. Uh, that's arguable. That's understandable as well. You can also say that a rollup just processes transaction off chain and posts the on chain, and then that's also a rollup. But in essence, what rollups versus sovereign rollups versus enshrined rollups versus validiums, it really just depends on where the off chain execution client posts the data and the state. So, for example, on Ethereum, it's considered a rollup if it uses Ethereum mainnet full economic and full decentralized security to post transaction data and state updates. For a sovereign rollup, there's like these new phenomenons that are arising from like using these specialized blockchains called DA layers, or what's commonly known as Celestia, as one of the protocols building this, and it posts the data on chain and then it handles the state and settlement uh, kind of on their own layer on their. But so it's you can argue either way. I think it's much easier to say like what's an L2 and what's an L1 versus what's a rollup versus what's not a rollup. So sovereign rollups pretty much are L1s that post data to Celestia, and Ethereum rollups don't are L2s because they the smart contract on Ethereum manages what is the proper fork or what is the correct state and what is the correct chain. So for rollups on Dymension, like that's this definition of like what's the correct chain is defined on the Dymension hub. For sovereign rollups on Celestia, that definition of like what's the correct chain is defined on the rollup layer and not on Celestia. For Ethereum, that's defined on the smart contract, even though there's a lot of debate in the Ethereum world that I try to not get into, but because a lot of people talk about semantics, but practically for the developer, security matters a lot, but it's kind of like choosing the tool set from the Cosmos with the Dymension included, or choosing the tool set from Ethereum with like the OP stack. So I think those are kind of like the divergent paths right now, which is the Cosmos SDK versus the OP stack, which is getting much more popular. But in terms of like what's sovereign, what's not, that's kind of, people could argue semantics the whole time and whatnot, but the most important thing is like bringing users and bringing applications and bringing developers.
Yeah, I think that what I'm, one of the things that strikes me here is that, we're looking for years, we've been talking about like how to scale blockchains, how do we scale blockchains? But it almost feels like the wrong target. We don't need to scale blockchains. We need to scale decentralized, censorship resistant applications. And the way we end up with applications that inherit the properties of blockchains, and that they're censorship resistant, they're secure, they're immutable, right? Like all the things that sort of came from Bitcoin. The way we scale those applications is by having infrastructure that allows them to retain those properties while being usable, right? And it doesn't really matter what underlying infrastructure there is. And you might want to, you might reason about, okay, which are the trade-offs that your application is going to make on the kind of like blockchain trilemma for each of those layers. But you can sort of, you can decouple, and that's what the modular blockchain thesis is trying to do, right? You decouple each of those layers such that the application retains those properties, even though there isn't like a one thing underneath it that is fully decentralized. And we haven't gotten into yet, like, decentralizing other parts of the infrastructure, like the RPC, like, the wallet and this sort of thing. But ultimately, I think that's like a good way to look at where things are going, is like we need to keep our eye on the prize, which is the user. What the user interacts with needs to retain the properties of a blockchain. The infrastructure itself, we can break that up in a million pieces, and probably will, right? If we look at how technology and like internet technology has evolved over the last 30 years, that's exactly what happened. And this is probably it's also happening here.
I think decentralization is a spectrum. So there is Bitcoin on one end where you can run your full node from Genesis and be sure like you're on the proper chain. Then there's chains like Ethereum where you're kind of either delegating tokens to a protocol that lives on the protocol, which lives on the Ethereum mainnet, like Lido or Rocket Pool, and you're not really running your node, or you're running your node from snapshot, like from a particular state. And that's kind of the same thing with Cosmos chains, where most people aren't running their full node to interact with the system. So you have to choose as a developer more so than a user, because the user doesn't really know which chain, as like a regular user. As a regular user, they don't know like which chain is decentralized, which chain isn't. Like they're not really comparing the centralization aspects of optimism or arbitrum, and we let that for the experts. But for the user, like they just want to make sure that they're secure, that they're not going to lose funds, that they're not going to lose funds by like some weird bridge attacks or attacks in general. But decentralization is a spectrum for developers to understand, and core blockchain developers as well. So dApp developers and blockchain developers. Like Bitcoin is one of or probably is the most decentralized protocol, just because you can run a full node from Genesis and know that you're on the right chain.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to talk more about this kind of high level vision stuff. This is the stuff I find often the most interesting. There's just one last thing I want to talk to you about before we get into Dymension and talking about more technical things. I mentioned at the top that you don't think that interchain security should scale to more than 5 chains. So of course you're referring to Cosmos interchain security. Why don't you think that interchain security should scale to more than 5 chains?
Interchain security puts more effort on the validators. So if I'm a validator and I want to secure, or Atom wants to secure, for example, 10 chains, 50 chains, then in its current version, I'm not saying the future versions, because the future versions kind of partition the work that each validator needs to do. But in its current version, I don't think it should scale more than like 5 chains, just because you start centralizing the applications and you want to make sure you're not hurting the Atom's value as you're getting more and more chains. So you don't want to start deploying a bunch of chains, kind of shit coins that devalue the Atom's efforts, because each validator is staking that same Atom and that same amount of capital for each individual chain. So as you grow the amount of chains, the likelihood for those chains to compensate for that effort is probably negligible, or there's like a negative expected value as you increase the amount of chains. But there are chains that I think should be secure from day one, like USDC, a generic asset issuance chain, a liquid staking derivative chain, things that really flow in the interchain. So you don't want those to be economically attacked. But there's chains that, like, there's no reason for them to be secured by 50, not 50, they wish, $3 billion in market cap. But
Yeah.
that's kind of my opinion. I think it makes sense, especially for validators. After speaking with a lot of validators, like, they don't want to secure every chain, or they don't want to run the binaries of every chain just because that team decided to participate. They want things that are both economically beneficial for themselves, and by product, the Atom token as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I think you're like, I think that obviously things like Noble, some like a liquid staking solution, things that are kind of core to the Cosmos hub and more broadly the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think it makes sense. Also, those are the things I think that for validators can make money, but you know, um, I don't see a point for like having a Chihuahua chain or something similar to that, or some like kind of user. I think that interchain security should be reserved for infrastructure or DeFi primitives, primarily. It's like,
For
yeah,
Atom, right? Because I think other chains are considering
yeah,
using interchain security as their own chain as well. So, like, if Chihuahua chain wanted to uh, secure other Chihuahuas, or other Yorkie chains, then that makes sense. But for Atom, because Atom's like a special chain, it's the first chain in the Cosmos. So I think it should secure as core of interchain protocols as there are.
yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about Dymension. We've gone on long enough here. Yeah, so can you describe the different components of Dymension, and looking at each layer? So we have like RollApps. There's the Dymension chain. You talked about this a little bit earlier, but let's break each layer down and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, so Dymension I consider, and it's kind of like a subjective consideration and point of view, even though I'm a builder of the chain, one of the builders. I believe Dymension is the layer 2 of the Cosmos, and it's the layer 2 of modular blockchains, and the layer 1 of Cosmos are the monolithic Appchains. Now, Dymension Hub is a Cosmos blockchain that is similar to other Cosmos blockchains like Osmosis, Juno, and others. They're different implementation, but it at its core is a Tendermint Cosmos SDK chain, or Comet BFT. Sorry. Uh, it's connected via IBC to other Cosmos chains, and then what happens is, on this Dymension layer 2 are these modular blockchains. The modular blockchains, and why are they modular blockchains and not monolithic blockchains? It's because they handle execution or transaction processing off chain, so you get very low latency, and then they post the data on chain and the state roots on chain, so someone could easily verify, hey, like this data doesn't match the state root. I downloaded it, so like what's going on? So they can submit what is called a fault proof or fraud proof or validity proof, whatever you want to call it. So that's the point of Dymension, is that Dymension, all the rollups are modular blockchains. So it's an ecosystem of layer 2 blockchains in the kind of IBC world. Those rollups, for example, they're not using the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint of what a Cosmos blockchain actually does or uses. They use what is called the rollup development kit, or the RDK for short, and it replaces or changes a few of the modules of the Cosmos SDK for not having validators. Instead of, they have a sequencer. So it's kind of like this block producer that posts the data off chain. And then they use Diamond, which is a fork of Tendermint, not Tendermint, Optimint, which was initially a year ago forked from that protocol. That protocol, Optimint, is built by the Celestia team for building sovereign rollups. But instead of that, we decided to remove that aspect of sovereignty on the rollup layer, and it posts the data to a DA layer like Celestia, and it posts the state to Dymension. So it enshrines Dymension as a settlement layer. Now, what does this provide? Why not use a sovereign rollup instead of a rollup? Is because the speed. You get significant speed increases when you use an enshrined settlement layer versus a sovereign rollup. So sovereign rollups, they gossip the blocks to each other per block. So like there's a sequencer, it posts to a DA layer, and then all the nodes in the network communicate with one another, and like they see if like the updated state is the correct one. So it's like one block, one block, one block. You can imagine it's much slower than what rollups do. And what rollups do is that there's a sequencer that batches all these mini blocks together. So you get very low latency of like, right now we're running on a testnet of 0.2 second soft finality on the rollup. And it posts the batch of blocks to the DA layer and it posts the state roots to the settlement layer. And the settlement layer has a period of X amount of blocks to say, hey, someone can submit a fraud proof or a dispute and say, hey, like this block producer X blocks ago said it was the state was supposed to be Y, but it's really X. So the Dymension hub is the arbitrator between the ecosystem. This is like the difference between sovereign rollups and what are rollups, which is kind of like an enshrinement of the settlement layer.
Okay, so I've got a couple questions here about basically like why you're building this. So, what I was so I read through the white paper, and it sounds like this roll-up development kit, this RDK, is a fork of the Cosmos SDK, or which has new modules that enable roll-ups to be deployed. I guess, you know, in terms of efficiency and you know, leveraging existing infrastructure, what makes it, and maybe I'm missing something here, like maybe this is a stupid question, but why not just build those modules into the Cosmos SDK and allow basically any existing Cosmos SDK chain to support RollApps, so that you could have like RollApps on the Cosmos chain and, you know, benefit from its security, or RollApps on Osmosis and benefit from its security? Why build an entirely new infrastructure to do this when we already have things that are highly secured that can provide data availability and settlement? Just, you know, building those modules into those chains. Or is there some, is that possible, or like am I totally missing something here?
I think it's possible, but what Dymension provides is the ability to arbitrate and to prove a different environment that it's the correct environment. So, for example, if you have a rollup onto Injective, if I'm not mistaken, and it's a Solana rollup, and injective is a WASM, then the injective has to be able to understand the what's going on, the state machine logic and everything, what's going on in the rollup. So what we say, like chains don't need to go crazy and start beefing up their minimalistic app chains and become settlement layers and DA layers, because it's quite a complicated process for actually understanding different execution environments to actually to handle the proofs, to verify the proofs of either ZK proofs or validity or fraud proofs. So what Dymension does is two things. One, it says the Cosmos chains, they don't have to do anything. All they have to do is be able to accept data, and then the rollup can post the data to that Cosmos blockchain. So the demand for the token and the demand for the block space of the Cosmos blockchain increases. So it inherits a part of the security from the DA layer. And that's because all the transaction data doesn't go to Dymension, it goes to the DA layer. And that's either Osmosis for Osmosis rollups, Evmos for Evmos EVM rollups, Celestia for generalized rollups that don't want to like pick a specific app chain, because that's kind of like the core is Dymension. People say it's rollups. It's really more similar to Validiums in the sense that the rollup sequencer decides, hey, which chain do I post the data? Which block space am I gonna pay for? So for the app chains that already exist, they don't have to change much. They don't have to change anything for a lot of them. But for why is Dymension built in the middle is because it handles those different virtual environments, those different execution environments. So it handles the proofs, the ZK proofs, the optimistic fraud proofs, and that's the purpose. And then it becomes a bridging hub between all of it. But the rollups themselves, they still inherit a lot of the security from whichever respective DA layer that they choose.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So just to recap here, at the top we're going to have rollups, and we'll get into the different types. But here you can currently there's an EVM environment, there's a COSM WASM environment, so people can deploy contracts there. They can deploy apps as EVM or COSM WASM. The Dymension chain, which is a Cosmos SDK chain that has a validator set, what it does is it is able to understand proofs from each of those environments and potentially other environments in the future. You want to build like Solana VM, or you want to build, I don't know, like whatever, you build any VM on top of that.
It's agnostic.
And then it's agnostic. And then data availability, that will post. So that's basically the settlement layer. And then it'll post to data availability chains. Like Celestia could be one of them. That's generalized data availability. But it could also post to the Cosmos Hub, to Evmos, to any. It doesn't need any specific permission from Osmosis to like post data to Osmosis. Anybody that chain can post data there. The Dymension
So
chain.
for each app chain, they will need to either include a module or a smart contract that accepts the data, because they're app chains at the core. It's like Bitcoin. Why is Bitcoin a DA layer now? Because they accept, like in the script or whatever it is,
Arbitrary,
they have the ability to post arbitrary bytes of data, and that's the same thing for any chain. So any chain could be a DA layer, and what happens is Dymension Hub bridges all the rollups to the IBC world.
And why? I mean, why couldn't like Cosmos Hub or Osmosis or any other chain just integrate whatever module, like whatever logic that Dymension Hub has to understand, these, like to understand the proofs from higher layer rollups? What is preventing say Osmosis? And would there not be an incentive for Osmosis to also or the Cosmos Hub to also integrate that logic in order to support an ecosystem of rollups?
We just haven't finished building, so they have to wait. But the truth is, it's an open source ecosystem, and at the end of the day, as I know very well, that a lot of it is community. So if the Cosmos Hub decides to take a module, and if Osmosis takes a module, and we take a module from Osmosis, it's an open source community. The tech is a small part of it. It's not a small part, it is the core part. It's the foundational part. but anyone could take open source code. We have very open licenses. We open source everything. We've been building in open from day one, pretty much. Uh, we don't close source anything. People could take our modules. At the end of the day, you can't take intellectual abilities and like the team's focus on this particular core mission from day one. We've been really focused on, so we understand the ins and outs and things that people don't talk about in the public. We understand, and things that people do talk about in the public. So at the end of the day, you could take modules. That's pretty easy. It's almost as easy as copy and paste, but there's much more core things to building a blockchain protocol than taking a module.
Yeah, and what is the? I mean, does the Dymension chain have any particular interest in posting data to the hub or Celestia or Osmosis, or is that a function of the application and what it's doing and what it's interacting with, or are all those data availability are sort of at an equal level, or like offering similar security?
So Dimension chain is a Tendermint chain. It doesn't post data anywhere. It's like their own validators, but the rollups do post to different chains, right? So there's the
Okay.
Dimension Hub, which is a Tendermint chain, and it's like Osmosis. It's not a rollup of anything. Dimension Hub is not a rollup. Dimension Hub is a chain. This is why it's IBC connected from day one. This is why people could go to the testnet and interact with a rollup and also interact with IBC, because all of the IBC goes through the Dimension Hub, which is Tendermint or Comet BFT soon.
Okay.
That's like a core aspect that a lot of people don't get. People think of like Dimension is a rollup on Celestia, or it's a whatever. It's not. It's a settlement layer. It's a settlement chain. The DA agnostic part is where the rollups can post to whichever IBC connected chain that is connected to Dimension. I hope that's
Okay. And so a
clear,
roll-up, I mean, in choosing, in like, say you've got a roll-up, what goes into choosing which chain they would post their proofs to?
So where they would post their data to, right? Because they're
Their
posting the
data, sorry.
proofs to them. Yeah. So they're posting the data. First, it has to be approved by Dimension Hub governance. That Dimension they have to say, like this DA is secure enough. Like we believe that it's decentralized. It's a community thing. So the first one that will be, of course, used is Celestia. Celestia has proven to really be experts in this field. They've been proven to show how they could scale the DA part, and it's very easily verifiable where the data is, especially when you're talking about autonomous cross-chain communication. So like that's a core protocol that's going to be a part of Dimension. But we could also say, hey, like eventually Evmos wants to have some DA as well to fill up their block space. So then Dimension Hub could approve Evmos, and now rollups have two options. They could post data to Evmos, or they could post data to Celestia. Now, which one are they going to choose? One of the core decision processes is which one is cheaper. That's because the sequencers that run the rollups actually pay for transaction bytes. And
Yeah,
which one's going to be cheaper is like it's a market, or it eventually will be a market. And that's probably like which one's the most scalable.
interesting. Okay, yeah. So it comes down to then, yeah, the availability of block space and the cost of storing that data and posting that data to chains. In terms of interoperability, so you mentioned that the Dymension chain is IBC compatible. Do the RollApps themselves interact directly with other IBC apps, contracts, etc., or does it have to go through Dymension? How does interoperability work broadly?
So Dimension Hub has a Dymint-like client, which is the like client of the rollup, and the rollup sends that message. The sequencer sends a message to the Dimension Hub via IBC, and the Dimension Hub looks internally and says, "Hey, did this dispute period end? Is there a fraudulent state?" And by looking internally, they could then allow people to bridge out. So IBC goes through the Dymension hub because the Dymension hub looks at the internal state and says, okay, like this rollup is good to go. This rollup, something happens, so we're not going to allow bridging. It depends on what the internal state is. And then by being IBC connected, and you can use like packet middleware, you can get these one hop IBC transactions or one IBC transaction from a EVM chain or a Cosmos chain to a rollup.
Interesting. But in your white paper, there's this IRC, this interchain roll-up communication. How is that different from IBC?
So IRC is pretty much not different than IBC. There is no difference between IBC. It uses the IBC protocol. It just adds a client type to the IBC protocol. IRC was formulated a year ago, but now that we've kind of ossified or beginning to ossify what is the IBC protocol for rollups, then it's just we've made some adjustments where we could. One of the core aspects in our decision and design process is to be as compatible with the community as it is. So being as compatible with the Cosmos SDK, being as compatible with IBC, those are two critical things that we want to keep. And we were able to keep IBC as it is. So eventually you could use interchain accounts, interchain queries, all of the applications that are built on top of IBC will be able to be used in rollups as well.
Okay, that's very cool. So talk about what's the role of sequencers? Where do they sit in all of this, and how are they incentivized to act honestly?
So sequencers post capital to the Dymension hub, and this could be in the form of Dime token, which is the Dymension protocol token, superfluid staking from Osmosis, which uses the LP of Dime and the rollup token or the rollup token itself when approved by governance. So the sequencer post capital on the Dymension hub, and then they get this block production time. They get allocated X amount of blocks. So if there's a marketplace or if there's a permissionless sequencing, then whoever posts more capital, then they get more block production time, similar to like a delegated proof of stake. Those guys, they get a portion of the revenue from operating this rollup. So they post the data, they pay for publishing the data. They post the state, they pay a little bit for updating the state. But then they get all the revenue, and it could be in terms of minting, it could be in terms of transaction fees, it could be in terms of MEV. However, the protocol decides to capture this, a lot of the rewards can go to the sequencer to pay for the operating cost. So it's kind of like similar to a block producer on a blockchain, on a regular blockchain, but instead of everyone downloading their own data, the sequencer is trusted for that period, and then they post the data on chain, and then someone else could come and download that data and say, hey, that was incorrect, and I could prove it to the Dymension hub. And by this, you have this one of n trust assumption instead of like a 2/3 trust assumption. And so like if the sequencer is doing something invalid, if they post like a invalid state transition, then we just need one actor to prove that they're actually posting something that doesn't make sense.
Okay, so it's an optimistic roll-up design.
To an extent, we use ZK for parts of the protocol, but because ZK has inherent latencies and just the tech isn't there to fully integrate into showing the correctness of state updates, then we are focused on doing optimistic rollups and integrating ZK in less stateful things.
Okay, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the aspects is, so there's two aspects. One is a sequencer withholding attacks, which it's a bit in the weeds, where like this, even though the DA,
good.
Yeah, so a DA sampling and what people are aware of is that how do you avoid data withholding attacks by block producers on like the data availability chain or the L1 chains? For L1 chain, for regular like Ethereum, all of the validators download the data and they check the end result. For DA chains, the light clients sample the block producer, because what happens on like Celestia, for example, is the consensus network is very light, that a sequencer or someone posts the data, but there's only like a commit to the data on the consensus network, and all the data, it goes to the DA network. And the DA network, a lot of sampling goes on to probabilistically determine like the sequencer, the block producer on the consensus network of Celestia isn't hiding any data, or like that commit contains all of the data. But that doesn't prevent a sequencer from acting maliciously. So a sequencer is operating on a different layer than the Celestia network. So a sequencer could gossip blocks to their peers, which it may not be the same block to the DA layer, or vice versa, whatever it is. So we have to make sure that the sequencers that are operating on Dymension, that when they post data to a chain, that they have to prove to the Dymension chain that all of the data that was posted was actually posted by them. So we could kind of ZK proof that they were actually posting the data. There's another way to, if you have a fraud proof, instead of rerunning the whole state machine, like someone comes and the Dymension hub, instead of actually virtualizing the machine and then rerunning the whole state against the logic and the context, you can do a ZK proof of the fraud proof, which kind of shows, hey, like this input is not the correct output of what the sequencer did. And these are also things that we're just only researching. But at the end of the day, the ZK protocol, or the ZK aspects of Dymension, will be there and will be integrated, but will be in aspects that don't require low latency. So for example, the rollups require low latency. One of the main selling points of a rollup is to have very low user experience latency, 0.2 second. You could go lower. It's configurable. So that's because it's a mixture of optimistic design for publishing data and also the batching process of quick blocks. But when you have ZK, the latency becomes much slower or much larger, even if you increase like the prover requirement or decrease the prover requirement. So for us, we integrate ZK in aspects that don't need necessarily to be low latent or very fast.
Okay, so when you're dealing with aspects that don't require low latency, you can leverage ZK, but in other aspects, you're leveraging this optimistic design that has much higher latency. Or much lower latency.
Right, much lower. And at the end of the day, it's a settlement layer, so it'll be able to take in ZK proofs of rollups that are run by provers, sequencers that are actually running on, like, executing the ZK logic, but that's not scalable, or the tech isn't there for everyone to just run a ZK prover and to have this kind of system. It's much more scalable in the near future and in the midterm future as well, is to have all these rollups to have just regular nodes operating the sequencers instead of these provers.
So in the event of a dispute, what's the resolution time that's expected, or is that variable depending on like the type of application? Or
you mean like the dispute period?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so it's configurable in the Dymension hub right now for enshrined settlement contracts and enshrined settlement layers. Optimism and Arbitrum are using 7 days. We can use that. It's not a like an empirical study to show that you need 7 days to actually secure an optimistic chain. It's more about the crypto economic incentives and disincentives that exist. So one of the things that we do is we're building a protocol called eIBC, which is just like an application layer on top of IBC, where a relayer would confirm a transaction prior to the dispute period. So they would help in bridging out. So for example, if I'm a user on rollup X and I want to bridge out tokens, but I don't want to wait the 7 days, then I just do the fast withdrawal and someone
Yeah.
else takes that
Someone's taking the
transaction.
risk.
And yeah, and once they take the risk, they're assumed to also be verifying the chain. So that's kind of like that fast withdrawal market maker stuff that we've integrated in a trust minimized way within IBC.
Okay, that's cool. Um, is it can Dymension also settle to Ethereum data availability, or is something prohibiting that from? Is it like, yeah? How does that work?
So for Ethereum mainnet to be communicating with Dymension, there needs to be like clients that understand the Ethereum mainnet. Tendermint's not the problem. Tendermint has already like clients, but because of the constraints of what is the consensus network of Ethereum, it's kind of like their issue. But once they kind of figure that out, and maybe you kind of take maybe greater economic risks or less economic security with eigenlayer with people at like different nodes, only like a selection of nodes using or giving like validity or giving attestation, then you can, for example, potentially use protocols that are built on top of Ethereum. But to use the whole Ethereum security for DA, you would need to really have kind of like snark the consensus of the Ethereum protocol and then put it into like client.
I mean, this is the same issue that Ethereum runs into for interacting with IBC, right? I mean, it's that the
Yeah, it's the same thing
consensus, yeah,
because Dymension
consensus
uses
isn't
IBC.
finality isn't instant, and so therefore there is a delay between the moment that, say, like a rollup would post data on chain, Ethereum would take some time to catch up. So there would be
Yeah, I
like,
don't think finality is definitely one aspect. I think there's other aspects in terms of the way that the consensus network of Ethereum is structured. Because I know Ethereum IBC is connected now with Composable, and they, from my understanding, Polkadot also has kind of maybe not a probabilistic finality, but maybe they do. So uh, I don't think finality is the only or probabilistic consensus is the only problem with connecting with IBC. But I'm not in the weeds of that.
yeah, that's the dream, right? It's the dream that Ethereum and IBC just work hand in hand without any middle
Well,
men or middleware or anything like that. Yeah.
it's the dream, so we could get more liquidity off of Ethereum. I
Yeah.
think the more liquidity on the IBC protocol, the better for the whole blockchain world. But right now, it's just siloed on the polygons, on the Ethereums of the world, which, in my opinion, are worse tech products and worse economic products than what Cosmos allows you to build.
So speaking of building, I want to go back to the developer a little bit. So there's there's different ways of building a rollup. So we've got the EVM rollup, the Cosm Wasm rollup, but you also have this RDK, which is this rollup development kit. It is, from what I understand, it's kind of like the Cosmos SDK in that it has modules that allows you to build a custom blockchain. Is the idea here to just kind of like build Cosmos SDK chains on top of Dymension? And why have EVM and Cosm Wasm specific modules when we already have Cosm Wasm modules for the Cosmos SDK that could also sit within this RDK, and we also have Ethermint, which could sit within. So because it feels like these are three separate products,
No, they're one
but are they
product.
just different?
Yeah.
They're just okay. It's just one product. Okay.
Yeah, so the RDK is a Cosmos SDK fork where you integrate in Ethermint or Wasm. So it's the same stuff. Like we don't rebuild anything. We changed the
Okay.
staking module. We changed the staking module because what happens is the staking module is tied with Tendermint's validator changes.
Of course.
Whereas the sequencer is different for, and when we replace Tendermint with Diamond, we have to change some of the integrations or the coupling between the business logic of a app chain and the like the networking logic. or so like the RDK is ABCI compatible, but we change some of the things, and one of the things that we change is say we we have validators in Cosmos, and there's a coupling between governance and computation. So a validator also validates the network, so they make sure that all the blocks that are being proposed are aligned with the state logic, so they're all on the same chain. But they also participate pretty much de facto as governors of the chain. So people delegate tokens, and they don't really the delegators don't pay attention. We separate this into two parts on the RDK. The compute is handled by the sequencers, but because the sequencers can be centralized, what the idea of the RDK and what the idea of Dymension for people who are watching is that, hey, we want people to build Cosmos blockchains just with a few nodes, but that inherit the security of the decentralized base layers. But when you have this kind of aspect of where you only have a few nodes or one node even, then you start to centralize the compute and the governance. So if it was a validator, that means that everyone's delegating to one person, and that sucks. So we say, hey, we cannot allow that. We can't allow a centralization to one party of governance and compute. We can allow a centralization of compute because you only need one person to disprove that sequencer was actually doing the correct state. But we decentralize the governance by using the NFTs. So that each rollup can distribute however many NFTs. They could have one NFT, they could have 1,000 NFTs, or they could have different functions of distributing and creating the NFTs. And then you delegate tokens to those NFT members. So it's similar to what people are using, like SBT tokens, soulbound tokens on different Ethereum chains. But here you could actually trade and you could actually start to accrue more value to the NFTs and also to the tokens. So we separate in the RDK two aspects, the governance and the compute, because we also don't think it's like economically aligned for a sequencer to decide how much rewards he gets. So it's kind of it becomes a negotiation, and it becomes more of like a real world corporate structure where you have the employee, which is the sequencer, could be the CEO, but he is operating the ecosystem. Then you have board members, which are the NFT members, and then you have shareholders, which are the token holders that delegate to the NFT members. And there's also rollups, for example, don't need their own token, so you can have like just pure one user, one vote. So you can get like these different structures and different, hopefully, very novel governance structures on the rollup layer, because they already inherent the security of the base layer. That's the core difference between the Cosmos SDK and the RDK. You inherit the developer tooling, you inherit the Go, the most of the Go modules. We try to stay up to date, even though we're moving to a version 46 right now. So a lot of the tooling, a lot of the protocol is very similar and tied to the Cosmos ecosystem. At the end of the day, it is a layer 2 on top of a layer 1, which is the Cosmos.
And you guys are just like constantly refactoring or sort of merging back into the RDK, the Cosmos SDK module, so that there's always this compatibility.
Whichever ones we see fit for rollups. So not maybe like anything that's upstreamed from the staking module, for example, that we may not want to use it. But if there's something that's new, like the group module, I think the group module, which allows kind of these sub DAOs, and with now you include like the NFTs as governors and these sub DAOs, I think that's a great integration between kind of like the main community pools and the sub DAOs. So like these things are upstream or downstream to the RDK, but there's things that don't necessarily need to be changed.
Very interesting. Yeah, with regards to the RDK, when developers are building applications here, what kinds of like compared to building an app chain, what are the key differences that developers should keep in mind, and what kinds of applications do you think are just not suited for RollApps? Like if you were talking to a developer and they're telling you, hey, like we're going to build this new app, we want to build it on RollApp, like what kinds of applications would you consider not well suited for this construction, and sort of steer them towards building like an app chain or interchain security or something like that?
Yeah. So, what was the first question? I'm sorry. What was the? I know, like, what was the?
Um, what is the what are the sort of the constraints of RollApps, and then
Right.
how does that tie
Gotcha.
into the types of
Uh,
applications
uh,
and like considerations that use developers should have when thinking about which to use?
yeah. So when you're developing a rollup, you're getting very low latency and you're getting easy bootstrapping. So instead of bootstrapping 50 or 100 validators, you get one or two or three nodes that you really need to operate as sequencers. So you have this uh, uh, reduction of nodes operating in the system because you're inheriting the decentralization of the base layer. So with this reduction of operators, you get a very fast experience for users. So if you want to do on-chain games or whatever, or DeFi products, then it's amazing. It's amazing because there's two aspects. One, the users never get increasing data costs. So the costs are always maintained because you could choose one DA layer and then you could choose another DA layer as long as you can balance your costs. And then you also have this latency. The detriment or the other side is like, why would you build an app chain over a rollup? Is because your protocol really needs that instant censorship resistance. So, and a decentralized protocol like an app chain, especially with new Tendermint style or new forks of Tendermint called Mulipisa, Mulipicy, or the one from Duality. They
Oh,
could have
okay. I don't know about this.
yeah. So their idea is like uh, there's a few block proposers and then like one block builder, and then each one the block builder has to have transactions from each block proposer based on stake. So there are applications that really need or inherent or should inherit the the instant censorship resistance from an app chain, but that's also it's a spectrum. Like maybe you could wait like a couple of days or a day for censorship resistant. So it depends on how sensitive that transaction is to time. I think that's kind of like the critical decision factor if your application should be built as an app chain or if it should be built as a rollup.
And is there a like I've been talking to a lot of people about this idea, and I'm starting to see this idea, um, in a lot of places, and so this idea that smart contracts, roll ups, app chains are not so much in opposition to each other, but exist more on a gradient, and so that we should see things as applications evolving or sort of graduating steps up that ladder. Is there an upgrade path for applications that maybe start as a roll app and at some point, for reasons that you mentioned, need to upgrade or transition to building their own app chain or some other form of consensus? Is that something that you think will happen with applications as they grow, or and is there an easy way for applications to do that?
I don't think it'll happen because the core aspect of a rollup is you're getting very low latency, which you just don't get the same latency of like 0.01 seconds. Like there's a reason why you're a rollup. And then you also have this coupling. You have to kind of change the structure to fit the validators of an app chain. So you have to reconfigure things. Is it possible? I think everything's possible in blockchain. It's very fluid, especially when you get into like the social layer of things and social consensus. But at like a practical level, I don't think that's going to be very common. I think it's more common for interchain security, consumer chain to move to a sovereign chain. And I think that's actually one of the great uh, uh, product market fits for interchain securities that it can secure 5 chains, but maybe eventually those chains kind of should recycle. But in terms of rollups, like if you're building a rollup, then you're probably want the like super low latency and that kind of aspect of and flexibility of rollup instead of an app chain.
Cool. Well, what's the roadmap And when can I think you guys already? I mean, I was in the portal a while ago and sort of fiddling around there. So there is something that's live.
Yeah.
Can people already build on this? And what are some of the early projects that are building using Dymension?
So we're building the first. We built the first testnet, which is it's a staggered testnet. So in February, we released the first rollup and the Dymension chain. The rollup posts the data to Celestia and the state routes to the Dymension chain. It's connected via IBC. We're integrating next week or in 2 weeks the EVM rollup with collaboration with the Evmos team and the Celestia team. So it's going to reuse the IBC token for gas of Evmos. So Evmos, people are going to take their Evmos faucet token IBC through the portal to the EVM chain and then interact with what we're going to deploy is a Uniswap fork. So people could trade on this testnet. So it's going to be the first EVM rollup that's IBC connected. And the cool thing is that it uses a different token. It doesn't have its own native token. That's going to be in collaboration with Evmos and Celestia. And so after that, we're going to move to incentivized testnet. We may throw in one or two more surprises in between with other collaborations, like a gaming DAO that we're very close with. And then we're going to deploy an incentivized testnet where people could deploy their own rollups. And this is going to be in the second quarter, likely in the latter half, like towards the end of the second quarter. And people will be incentivized to deploy their own chains. People will be incentivized to participate in the ecosystem. And then we'll move on to mainnet. Mainnet is going to go from permissioned to permissionless over time.
Very cool. And yeah, I think people can go to Dymension.xyz and you've got everything there, the documentation, the light paper. They can learn more about building a RollApp on Dymension, right?
Yeah, check out the Discord. We're definitely active. We have a very active community. So sometimes it's hard to get into our community, but we do that on purpose. We want to make sure that people really kind of have heart, and we really, 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 really value the people who are building the community because it's a decentralized chain. It's their chain that we're building. We're taking a centralized idea, an idea that was in someone's head, to an actual product, to a decentralized protocol that's is going to be autonomous. And we need people all around the world to operate these nodes, and we need people to just spread the gospel.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's been really, really fun chatting with you and learning more about Dymension. And yeah, looking forward to seeing more coming from this ecosystem, and certainly, decentralized applications being developed as RollApps.
Definitely. I look forward to it as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. I go live every week. So if you want to hear more of this sort of content, you can follow the Interop on YouTube and also on Twitter. And I do want to announce that we have announced the dates for Nebular Summit 2023. So Nebular Summit is the Interchain Builders Conference. It'll be the second edition. It's happening in Paris right after ECC. And this year it'll be on July 24th and 25th. Last year's event was a huge success. People loved it. It was really cool vibes. But this year we're going even bigger. We're going to do 2 days. We're expecting up to 800 people. And Nebular Summit is really about bringing the brightest minds in the interchain together for technical docs and developer workshops. It is a technical conference, so you can expect to learn lots about how to build on the interchain. We have an amazing new venue. It's this place called the Albert School. It's a historical site in central Paris in the 10th district. And it is formerly a ceramic factory. So it's got this very cool kind of Art Deco vibe and the sort of modern elements. So you check out the Twitter. Twitter's Nebular Builders. And and this is going to be happening in July. Also check out the website, nebular.builders. And you can see here the initial list of speakers. There's about 15 so far, but we're soon going to be expanding. We'll have somewhere around 80 speakers for this conference, and many faces I'm sure you're already familiar with here. And so tickets go on sale on Monday, April 3rd. So if you want to get notified when tickets go live, early bird tickets, you can enter your email on the website, or you can follow us on Twitter to get more information. And yeah, certainly if you guys, if anybody from the Dymension team is going to be in Paris for ECC, would love to have one of you, or at least more or as many people from the team as possible, to participate or even give a talk.
Cool, sounds good.
We'll let you know. All right, thanks so much. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you next week.